Hey everyone, it's Scott from startmedia.com. Today we'll be covering the Yoast SEO plugin. This is my most highly requested video, and I also own the premium version of this plugin, which I will go over in another video. The reason I'm separating them out is because Yoast SEO base is where most of the features are. Premium, think of it as kind of like an add-on. It adds on additional functionality, and each one of the premium add-ons that Yoast sells basically just adds new features on top of the base plugin. This will give you the most basic foundation of how Yoast SEO is. In another video, I'll cover the premium SEO, whether it's worth your time and money, and why I bought it myself, and so on and so forth. I'll also be doing an SEO series where Yoast SEO will be the foundation SEO plugin that I'm using. So a lot of the recommendations I will extrapolate from Yoast SEO, and I'll be giving you additional suggestions. When you install Yoast SEO, you'll get a SEO menu at the bottom left-hand menu of your main menu bar, and at the admin bar at the top, you'll have a new Yoast icon. You have the dashboard section. This is your notification center and problem alert center. It'll let you know if there's a serious issue. You can also go through an SEO configuration wizard. From my experience, the configuration wizard is okay for first-time users, but it's better for you to get going deep to learn more about the plugin settings. Under the features section, you can enable and disable. I normally leave everything enabled. The only thing I may uncheck is the admin bar, which will remove this icon from your admin bar. And I only do it just to clean it up. Then there is the Webmaster Tools Verification Center. This will allow you to paste your Webmaster verification HTML tags from Yandex, Bing, Baidu, and Google. Keep in mind that Baidu is strictly in Chinese, so trying to find the tag if you can't speak Chinese is quite difficult. I would say though Bing and Google are, for this audience, typically what you're going to use. Then we're going to go into the additional sub options. You have search appearance, you have search console, social tools, and then the premium tab. I'm going to break through each one of these and go into the sub options that appear. Under the search appearance section, this is where you can actually configure what the SEO settings are going to be globally. These are your default settings. If you have pages, they can be overwritten and modified on a per page basis. And we're just going to go through what the typical recommendation is. So the title separator is strictly what this separator is in your title. As you can see on my front end, it's a very small dash. And that's typically the recommendation that I have for your titles. Some people like the straight line. It's truly just an appearance point of view. The one thing to keep in mind is if you have overly complicated items, say this, you will be using more pixels, which can interfere with your title length, because titles are not only character counts, they are pixel widths. So you don't want to get too far into very crazy separators or having very large and complicated separators. So I either typically recommend using this small dash, this is what I personally use, or the straight up and down dash. And then if your website doesn't have a static homepage set, so for most people, you won't have this box. But if you have a static homepage, then you'll have to modify that page by editing it directly to set your SEO settings, which I will cover later in this video. This section though allows you to set the homepage specific title and meta description. So I could say, this is my homepage. And to prove that it works, I'm going to hit the save button, and then I'm going to view page source, and the description is here. It says just another WordPress site, and then now it says this is my homepage. So it's a very simple meta description insertion tool. One thing to keep in mind is that this tool does not measure the length of your meta descriptions. So unfortunately, what that means is if you're not using a static page, you'll probably want to write your meta description in a blank empty post just to make sure that you're not going over length, even for your title. So if I import my title settings to something like this, I'm like, okay, I'm in the green, but I could still clearly write more. So you would want to write in a longer title to fill up the space, and the same thing for the meta description, and then just copy it over once you've successfully written it and you're using as much space as you can to get your keywords in there. What I typically recommend doing is you have the site name and then you have some kind of tagline or description of what your website or your service is. That way you're getting your keywords in there and it still sounds appropriate. One thing to avoid is just listing out random keywords in the title. So if I said Gutenberg Playground, Gutenberg plugin, Gutenberg WordPress, Gutenberg editor as my title, the problem with that is it doesn't make any coherent sense. If somebody was to read that description, or that title tag rather, it wouldn't sound appropriate, and it would clearly just look like I'm trying to manipulate the search engine to rank for those keywords. And I would probably expect a lower click-through rate if I have that as my title. The meta description is going to be the description that Google shows in your search results. And in a down the SEO line series, I will go into writing decent meta descriptions that are supposed to get good click-through rates and rank decent in Google. Just make sure when you're writing your meta descriptions that you use as much space as you can while staying in the green, and that you're not only getting your keywords in there, but you're making coherent thoughts as well. You want your meta descriptions and titles to read organically. You want them to sound like a human wrote them, and that it wasn't just a robot suggesting to how to get a bunch of keywords in your meta description in SEO title. One thing to knock off right about the bat is Yoast SEO has no functionality for adding the meta keywords tag. And the reason for that is it's not used. If anyone told you it's being used, they're wrong. It hasn't been used in forever. It was stopped because everybody was abusing it, and it was a really bad way of handling it. Any SEO plugin that does use it, I recommend that you don't enable it. After you've gone through this homepage section, you then have the knowledge graph and schema.org. So if you're an individual, if the website is, for instance, scotthartley.com, it's about me specifically, or scotthartley.me, then I want to make sure that I'm selecting a person as the schema.org markup. If I'm operating as serpmedia.com, well, that's my business. So I want to know that my organization name is the name of the business. And then you want to make sure you're uploading some sort of logo to fit in the space. After you've done that, you're going to need to go to the content types section. Content types are your post types. Now, what this means is any type of post type that's registered in WordPress will appear in this section. You can enable indexation, and you can enable and disable various features. So post, for instance, you want them to show in your search result history, in your search results. And you want the date snippet in preview because most of the time your posts are going to have a date snippet in Google search results. If you enable and disable this, it will not remove the markup that adds the date in Google search. So just because you say that you date and snippet preview is set to hide, it doesn't mean that it's not going to show at Google. This is a common misconception. This strictly controls whether or not the date shows in the preview right here. So if I click save right now, just to illustrate, because it's set to show, I should now see the date right here, exactly. And you see the date because Google search is extrapolating it from your markup, and almost every website is going to have the date. It typically is only enabled though for your posts. Pages don't typically have that, so there's no real reason in enabling it. This is a good default suggestion as well. The title is the title of the article. The page is the page and then the number of. So say there's 3 pages in your article, it'll be page 1 of 3, or sorry, it'll be 2 of 3 because the first page never has that markup. The separator, so the little dash, and then your website title. Your meta description, I typically just make sure that it's set to excerpt. And the reason I set it to excerpt is because it's going to generate the description from the first sentence in your article that isn't containing something like a short code or a video. It's going to be making a description automatically from the content of the post. So in the event of you having a website and never doing any SEO and never adding any sort of meta descriptions, instead of going back through 6 years worth of posts, many of which there's no inherent value in you writing a handmade description for, this will just put something there. Otherwise, what will happen is Googlebot may try to write a description from the first sentence period on the website. Oftentimes what you'll see is if you don't include it, Googlebot will go into the website and it'll try to make the first sentence of whatever text is on the front page. I see this all the time. Or maybe it'll take it from the copyright section. It'll say copyright 2016, and it just won't make a lot of sense. So it's almost always better to at least make something from the first sentence than it is to let Googlebot find random text on the page that is just not relevant. One thing to keep in mind too is just because you update the settings in Yoast SEO doesn't mean it's going to reflect immediately in Google search. Googlebot has to revisit the page, view that meta description tag, and say, do I want to show this? And if it, most of the time it will say yes, so long as you're not spamming and abusing it, then it will go ahead and make that the new result snippet in Google search. Hit the save button. And then there's the media section. This section should always be set to yes. I've never found a good use case where somebody has set this to no for some unknown reason. What this does is it redirects attachment pages, the blank pages that WordPress makes for every image that's uploaded, and redirects it to the image itself. So if you upload image.jpg, WordPress will create an empty page that is the actual image on there. It'll create an actual visitable page that you can click on and see. What this does is it says, well, you don't need to have a blank page with just the image. It just redirects it to the image because that's what you want to be indexed. If you set this to no, you will get a lot of thin content inserted into Google search. And that's because most people don't fill out the description section of the images. Most people do alt tags, maybe titles. Some people do the caption, but almost nobody does the description section. And if you don't do that, there's no text on the page. So you're just showing a blank page with an image, and you can get into serious trouble and your rankings can be hindered from doing that. Under the taxonomy section, I typically leave everything here to the default because my taxonomies I tend to want to optimize by hand. And I will have to make a video that goes into my taxonomy structure and my optimization for the actual archives themselves. But typically what I recommend is you put the term description in the meta description section. The term description is the text that you add to your categories or tags, also known as the tag or category description. It's when you actually bother to fill out the box on each one of those pages. If you've done that, it's great that that's typically what you want your meta description to be. If you haven't, this is not going to spit anything out, which is recommended. Otherwise, if you try to do excerpt, it may try to generate it from the text on the page, even though it should only generate it from the content of the excerpt itself. It just leave it this way. And one thing that's often debated is whether or not tags should be indexable. I recommend that tags are indexed. Most people don't use tags in such a bad way that it's a detriment to their ranking in Google search. If you have a lot of tags, and if you've been using tags solely as a means of filling keywords, just putting keywords on the page, then yeah, you would want to mark this as no index, because what's happening then is you're basically saying you're spinning up a new page, a new archive for every single time you make a keyword with only that, and typically the one post that's on there. So if you have a lot of tags and only have one post linking to them, then it very well may not be good for you to enable them to be indexed. You'll probably want to consult with whoever does your SEO, your webmaster, or if you don't have either one of those, then you could always feel free to email me. But on a serious note, leave it as the term description, and in most use cases, so long as you haven't abused it, you can allow these to be indexed. Tags are important for your site structure when done correctly. Then there are formats. Formats I almost always disable. Formats, when you have post formats in WordPress, are what allow you to select if it's a video or a gallery or a quote. Most themes don't enable this, and if yours does, you'll see it. If you're using the classic editor, you'll see the little drop down. It's got the little buttons, and normally you just leave it as standard. These things are already set to no index by default. I just disable the archives altogether because they are truly the definition of pointless. You then have the option to remove the categories prefix. I leave it because I want the search engine to understand that these are categories. They're not just posts or pages. I could create landing pages that are similar to categories, but I tend to just leave the URLs to include the category prefix. Archives. Under the archives section, you want to make sure that your author archives are indexed, but you only want to make sure that they're indexed if they have a post. Arguably, if you use BuddyPress where you have users spinning up, you could go ahead and set it to index so all the archives are indexed and they're all listed out, and that would be fine. But you don't want to have, if you're just a blog site or a business site and you have 4 or 5 admins, and it's just so that way they can update plugins or maybe just check the stats if you have your Google Analytics pulled into the admin panel, and only one of you is actually writing posts, there's no reason to enable them all to be indexed. There's not going to be anybody searching for their names to return 0 results on their archive. It's just not worth it. But the one thing I do make sure is under the meta description, I write the user description. The great thing about the author archives too is you can optimize them around the user and you can make them have specific titles. The default title isn't bad, it's not good, but you can customize it by manually editing it. And one thing that you want to get into the habit with, especially with archives, is you want to be manually editing them. and you want to be adding value to those pages other than just leaving the defaults, because the default settings are just a fallback in the event of you not doing anything. If you can do something and you have the means and you have the ability and you have the time to do it, by all means, it's better to optimize those pages individually. Then there are the date archives. Date archives should be disabled. The problem with date archives on WordPress is most people only tend to publish on a routine schedule, one post every Monday or one post every Friday. And if you allow date archives to be indexed, first of all, what will happen is you'll get a lot of archives in index that really don't provide any inherent SEO value, because the only content that's in them is a link to a single post that you published on that day. Maybe you have the year archives and you go to the year archive and all that's in there is a single post from 2020 because it just hit the corner. It just came around the corner. I mean, at the time of filming, it's the 19th, but the point still stands of there's no really any value in indexing it for a single post. Nobody's going to search the date archives. Nobody's going to land on them organically. You have no real way of optimizing and tuning their titles or meta descriptions either, except in Yoast SEO. And even then, it's just not worth it. Set it to disabled and save yourself the hassle. Special pages are basically just your search pages and your 404 pages. They only let you modify the titles because these pages are set to no index. There's no reason to add a meta description. They should never be indexed and they should never appear in search results. If you have search pages appearing in your search results, you need to consult whoever manages your site, because they're thin and useless content. Nobody wants to see search results in Google search results. It's just how it is. Breadcrumbs. I highly recommend breadcrumbs are enabled. I recommend going through enable breadcrumbs, select enable. And then under post, I recommend selecting category, because your category is typically what you're describing the bulk of the post as. If I write a post about Yoast SEO, I may call my category on SERP Media SEO or search engine optimization. And then I want this to be under that category because the bulk of the post will be regarding SEO, and that's the primary category. If you make it tags, you're gonna have issues struggling with determining the primary tag. Tags are meant to just broadly, super broadly. If it mentions SEO anywhere, then you can relate it to another post that might be about performance optimization. Or you could relate it to another post about a blogger that you were talking about who did SEO on her site offhandedly. You can get down the rabbit hole with tags of where you have so many that there's no primary or parent. So it's almost always better to set category. You can also set a content type archive to show in breadcrumbs for taxonomies. What this briefly means is you can set the blog page to be the preface to categories. So if you're on, say, your category page for your uncategorized category, the preface to uncategorized would be, it'd be home dash blog dash whatever the category's name is. And there's not really any value in that from my experience, because when you're writing content, the categories are almost like mini landing pages in themselves. You don't want to treat category archives as like children of your blog. I suppose you could if you're working with custom post types like portfolios, but for most websites where you're only having a single content type being posts and pages to a lesser degree, there's not really any inherent value in breaking it up that way. You could do it as a test and run the test in Search Console to see if you have any additional impressions, but from my experience, just enabling it for posts is sufficient for most websites. And then under RSS, you can modify the output of your RSS feed. This has basically no SEO impact. It's just a bonus feature that's been there since forever. The Search Console feature is discontinued. Google Search removed the API. They're supposedly working on something better, but this has been out for a while now, and I don't think it's going to be coming back anytime soon. The social settings is then where your next settings come in. Social settings are the social media pages that relate to your page. So on SERP Media, for instance, I put my Facebook, my Twitter, my Instagram, my LinkedIn, my Pinterest, and my YouTube. I don't create profiles that I don't actually have just to fill up this space. It's to get knowledge graph data shown, and I'll actually pull up my Cert Media listing in incognito mode to show you. So Cert Media appears with a profile on the far right for my YouTube page. Now, when Google visits the rest of the markup and learns, okay, these pages are also for this website, it will add them. That's what this section is for. It's called the knowledge graph. And when you set up the organization schema in the introduction, that is to help get the knowledge graph data listed. So fill out all the ones for all the profiles you have. Facebook section allows you to control the open graph data that is output by Yoast SEO. Typically, if you have, again, a static homepage, like most of you will, this section right here will not exist. What you should do, though, is make sure you have a default image enabled. So whatever image you have that is a catch-all type of image, then put it here. So say on my website, I could create like a little banner at like 1280 by 720 pixels, set that as my fallback and say WordPress maintenance service, because that's a pretty good description of what I like to offer and the type of work that I do. And in the event of there not being any image for the URL they're sharing, it's a good catch-all. Or I could just write Cert Media in big bold letters and send it off, but that would look really cheesy. It wouldn't really be enticing to click on. So make sure you select at least one image here, because there are types of posts that will not have a open graph image. Pages more or less almost never have an image because Yoast SEO by default pulls in the image that is set as the featured image for the open graph data. So make sure you set one image here. Twitter. My typical recommendation with Twitter is you leave this alone, make sure it's enabled and that you have summary with large image. Pinterest. If you have a Pinterest account, paste your verification code here. That's all this setting is for. And then there's the tools section. Tools basically just allow you to do a couple things. The text link counter, which will allow you to count links in your post. And it doesn't work on this staging site, I will have to note, because I broke it. Long story. But I ended up breaking the functionality on my staging site, but it works on my live site. But it does work. If you have existing post and content types, what this will do is it'll go through and it'll count the links in your post, because internal linking in your post is extremely important. This is just kind of like a way to catch up if you haven't been using Yoast SEO since the inception of your website to calculate that data. You'll also have the ability for a bulk editor, which allows you to bulk quickly and easily bulk edit your titles and meta descriptions for various posts and pages. And you can do the same thing for your meta descriptions. Then there is the import and export to import and export your SEO settings. If you had Yoast SEO, you can export the settings and then just simply re-import them here. If you're moving from another SEO plugin, say you used all-in-one SEO pack in another life, you can import that data here. Because this is a staging site, I don't have any data that it detects to import from, but if you were using another SEO plugin, this is where you would go to import it. And I'll make another video that kind of shows how that process works, and I'll go over it with you in more detail. That way you can understand how to properly migrate from one SEO plugin to another, and I'll also show you the SEO data transporter plugin, which is pretty cool. And then you'll have one additional menu item in this section for most of your sites. But again, this is a staging server, so the requirements are a little bit different. You'll have a file editor tab, which will allow you to edit the htaccess and robots.txt file. You'll be able to edit them directly from the menu. It works great. I've never had any gripes with it. It's just, don't edit those files unless you know what you're doing, because you're very prone to break things. If you mess up your htaccess file with the incorrect syntax, you could be locked out of your WordPress admin panel. The only one that's a little bit free to mess around with is the robots.txt file, because there's nothing you can really break except for making your site non-indexable. I wouldn't really worry too much about it though, but nevertheless, you can edit them. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about editing a post with Yoast SEO, and I'm going to go through briefly the recommendations and why I like it and I prefer it. So I'm on the Gutenberg playground, and I'm going to edit the default post just so that way I have some text, because I don't want to write something because I'm lazy. So I'm not really lazy, but the point is I don't want to have to write an entire post to illustrate it. So you have a couple of sections in Yoast SEO's editor that make it really streamlined and not cluttered. What I like about this is effectively the length of this, and it's not particularly too wide. Unlike some of the competition, which I've recently reviewed, some videos that may be coming out after this, maybe before, I cannot say, but either way, I've already done some SEO plugins on this channel, and what I find is a lot of them have a really long and lengthy SEO section that is just really, really annoying to work with. What's great about Yoast SEO is it integrates very well with Gutenberg, more so than any other SEO plugin, like to an astonishing degree. First of all, you have a nice little section over here, which is basically this functionality, but over here, which is good because it's a lot easier to manage. Now, not everything is over here. For instance, you cannot modify your advanced settings. And a lot of the time, personally, I don't pay attention to this sidebar section unless I'm writing a really long and detailed post. And the reason for that is if I'm writing a 300, 500 word post, it's honestly easier for me to just scroll down, see my progress, and go back. But if I'm writing a more detailed post, say 2,000 words, I like having the analysis in my view so I can always see where I'm going. Now we're going to talk about what the focus key phrase is. The focus key phrase, or as they used to call it, the focus keyword, is typically the term or the search engine query that you're trying to rank for. So if you're new to this plugin, I'm going to do a whole in-depth video on this kind of content optimization later. But on a brief note, you want to set the key phrase typically first. And the reason for that is you're writing your content around the key phrase. You're not manipulating your key phrase to be green for your content. So if I type in the word WordPress, I'm probably not going to rank too well. I get a red smiley face. But if I just type in it, I have to find a word that's, I'm going to write in to, and then I'm just going to write the word to again. Hello to world. I'm manipulating it to try and get it to be green just to illustrate it. But the point of this is when you're working with the focus key phrase, you need to focus your content around it. You don't focus the key phrase around your content because you're trying to optimize your content in your article around the search query that you're attempting to rank for. So the SEO setting is extremely important to nail down right before you start. And the premium version allows you to analyze related key phrases and synonyms and treat them kind of the same. It's not perfect, I will admit. And again, I will mention that in a later video, but the functionality exists. The one thing that I do like about Yoast SEO though, is that its recommendations are much better than most of the competition. A lot of the competition, in my opinion, is just not accurate. There's two types of competition for the SEO market. The ones that completely knocked off Yoast, and then there's the ones that did their own thing, and then there's the ones that did it right. And there are some that have done it right, I will admit. And then there are the ones that did it wrong, and it just brings up a lot of questions. So we're going to go through each one of these analysis recommendations just to briefly go over it. Outbound links. You should include an outbound link in your article. Typically, you want to include it to a source if you can. And if it's a reliable source, make sure it's set to follow. You can link to external content without using nofollow, especially if it's a good, reliable source. It helps build your authority. Internal links. It's good to add internal links to other posts or other archives. So say you made an archive called WordPress. Then you want to link that first section where I said WordPress right here. Welcome to WordPress. You can link that to your category for WordPress post. Image alt attributes. All of your images on your page should include an alt attribute if you can. I wouldn't drive yourself crazy with it if you have several thousand posts and even more images going back and rewriting them. You would drive yourself mad for very little benefit. The text length. Yoast recommends 300 words. I recommend typically try to do 500 words if you can, but the recommended number of words is truly up for debate. If you can only physically write around 200 words for a piece of content, it's better that you get that out than try to make up fluff, more or less. Then there is the meta description length. You should try and use up to 100, up to 156 as close as you can. I agree with that. Use as much space as you can. Then there's the key phrase in the title. You want to make sure that your key phrase is in either your post title or the SEO title because it's what you're talking about. Not so much for the optimization part, but if you're writing a title, you want it to be about what you're trying to rank for. And if you're trying to rank for kittens and your post is about 10 reasons dogs are the best companion ever, you're doing it wrong. It doesn't make sense. So this is kind of a no-duh suggestion, but it's still a good one. The SEO title width, make sure that you're using as much space as you can. As you can see, I clearly have more space that I could use. Key phrase in the slug. You should make your key phrase in the slug if you can. I wouldn't drive yourself crazy with this suggestion. Function words in key phrase. Your key phrase 2 contains functional words only. So a good key phrase typically is a phrase without just function words. So like to, a, in, at, things that are not keywords that you would typically rank for. The key phrase is in the introduction paragraph. That's good. You should have your key phrase in the introduction because that makes sense. The key phrase length is good. So the key phrase is not too long or too short. Well, it should actually be too short. So I would suggest that they recommend it to be a little bit longer. The key phrase in the meta description. So it's in the meta description. You should have your key phrase in your meta description. And the key phrase is not previously used. Using a key phrase multiple times can cannibalize your rankings a little bit. And that's pretty much all from the SEO analysis functionality. You then have the ability to add, make it a cornerstone content. Cornerstone content is truly just a means of organizing content for yourself. There's no SEO benefit to this, but it helps you understand if the content that you're writing is important. You want to be able to make sure that you can revise it and say, this is my proud work. This is what I want to rank for. Don't make everything cornerstone content and don't make nothing cornerstone content. You have more important posts than the other. Not all of your posts are equally as important. So mark your important ones as cornerstone, just to help maintain and make it easier for you to manage. The advanced section is strictly for enabling and disabling various features. You can enable whether it's indexed or not. You could choose to follow links in this post or not. You can also choose to apply different meta robots, such as no archive, no image index, or no snippet, but it doesn't matter too much. I wouldn't really mess with this. And the breadcrumbs title, you don't really need to mess with this either. The one I would check is if you're copying content from website to another, you could do cross-domain canonicals here, which you should do if you are doing that. Readability analysis. This is the one that always brings up the problems with people. The readability analysis is more or less something that people always question because it's not SEO related. It's just common sense a little bit. Yoast uses the Flesch reading scale, which is basically a test that says you should try to write around like an 8th grade, 9th grade level in the sense of the United States educational system. The reason for that is most people aren't that educated and they can't handle more difficult content. So if you're trying to apply to the most broad audience possible, your content should be easy to follow. Don't drive yourself crazy with this readability score, but just keep it in mind. If you have a lot of words, but you have no transition words, you probably have a problem with your contents and how it's being structured and written. If you're using too much passive voice, make sure you revise it and that you're declaring what it is you're talking about so people can follow what you're writing about. You should have variety in your sentences so that way they don't feel run on and that they're basically being copied and pasted. You should use subheadings in your text if possible to help break up sections and to describe what they are. Your paragraph should not be too long. Too long of a single paragraph can be very confusing, hard to read. And especially on mobile devices, if there's no breakup, they won't read it and they'll just treat it as a giant wall of text. And then sentence length, try to avoid using extremely long sentences. If it's a run-on sentence, you're going to be hindering the person's ability to read it because the point will eventually be lost. If the sentence goes on too long, the point of what's being said will be lost somewhere along that sentence. Don't worry too much about the readability analysis. And in fact, it can be turned off in the general settings in Yoast SEO. But just keep it in mind for when you're writing content. You have to remember that the average person reading it is probably not as well educated as you might be. Now, unless you're writing and targeting for higher education individuals, so if you're writing a blog post on thermonuclear physics, I'm just putting words together right at this moment for the sake of an example. Your audience is obviously going to be of much higher they'll be in a much higher educational status than the rest of the population. So you can ignore this entirely for that suggestion, but most people aren't. So you should try to apply to the biggest group of people possible. And then finally is the social settings. This just allows you to modify the Open Graph and Twitter card data for the individual post. You can add a unique title, a unique description, and image for both Facebook / Pinterest / everything else that Facebook is, and then Twitter. The reason for that is when you're targeting social media, you'll find that certain ways of how your titles are formed, to be fair, it's mostly clickbaity. If you write a Facebook title, it sounds more clickbaity, then you're going to get a lot more users, even if your SEO title sounds much more formal. So if I wrote a post, how to write a Gutenberg paragraph in WordPress, how to write a paragraph in Gutenberg in WordPress, just taking words again. But if I wrote Facebook title, how Gutenberg completely changed the way you write in WordPress, that's an entirely different sounding title. And I'm willing to bet that one would get a lot more clicks than Facebook because it sounds more interesting than it may actually be. Some would say that it's misleading or clickbaity, but it works to a degree. You just have to think about when you're targeting your audience, you have to think of the type of audience you're targeting, and this goes into a whole other realm of social media marketing. But when you're writing content, you have to think about the audience that you're targeting and how you're going to bring them in. And typical groups on Facebook are going to have different means to attract than those who are in Google search. People in Google either need entertainment or they want to be educated. But I would say that most of the people on Facebook are looking more for more entertainment and wow factor than they are for education. So more or less, that's basically everything you need to know about Yoast SEO. Kind of. As I said, there will be extra videos for the premium, the add-ons, and I'll be doing a series on general WordPress SEO down the line as well. But if you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the comments below and I'll try to help you out. Otherwise, head over to the WordPress.org forums and ask their staff directly. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.